Hey guys, before we get started, I wanted to tell you about a free resource on the Scrivener Solutions website. We all know that consistency builds trust, but somehow getting on that consistency train can be hard. Finding the time, thinking of what to say. Oh my goodness, believe me, I feel your pain. I get it. I know all too well the struggle. Sometimes we make things way too complicated for ourselves. You don't need a complicated plan to become consistent with your content marketing. Working that consistency muscle by using a super simple content plan will give you a big win, and you can build upon that. We have a free resource to help you. Go over to scrivenersolutions.com/checklist and download the super simple strategy to jumpstart consistent content creation checklist. Yes, it's a long name, but all you have to remember is scrivenersolutions.com/checklist, and you can get that instant download. Get started on the right foot and make the commitment to consistency. Other things will follow, but consistency really does matter. Start super simple and download the checklist at scrivenersolutions.com/checklist. All right, now onto the show. Hi, I'm Gayla Scrivener, ex-corporate girl and now work-from-anywhere adventure seeker. Creating a work-from-anywhere lifestyle isn't without its challenges, but those challenges certainly don't overshadow all the many benefits. What breaks my heart is seeing folks stuck and unhappy in a career and lifestyle when they want more out of life. I believe that we all have the opportunity to create the life of our dreams and earn a living in fun and creative ways to make our dream lifestyle a reality. You too can experience wonderful adventure and freedom as you live life on your own terms. In this weekly podcast, I share experiences when it comes to growing a lifestyle business through guest interviews, content marketing experience and perspectives, virtual leadership lessons, and I'll even throw in some travel adventures. My hope is through all the interviews, the tips, advice, and personal experience, you'll be inspired and motivated to keep going and creating your dream lifestyle. Life's an adventure. There's no time but the present to live life to the fullest. There, and welcome to today's show. I'm glad you're here because today's show is going to be a bit different than it has been for the past several episodes. As I record this right now, I am out and about traveling, and I thought that I'd share a bit about working from anywhere when it comes to internet coverage. And what sparked me to work up this episode was that a friend of mine and a colleague is so excited about getting a little RV and asked me how Robert and I managed to stay connected to the internet when traveling. And really, come to think about it, many folks over the past several months have been asking us how we stay connected as they look into RV life. So today, I thought I'd share my response with you too, just in case you were wanting to venture out and do some RVing or any other kind of travel. Robert and I started our been there doing that travel lifestyle in our 38-foot Alfa SeeYa diesel pusher RV way back in 2011. Now, traveling in such a large vehicle and towing a Jeep to boot, mostly we were limited at that time as we traveled around in that RV. We were limited to staying in RV parks. And not all RV parks, mind you. Some national parks only accept 35-foot and lower length vehicles. Although we don't travel right now as much in our RV as of late, the last few years, it's been parked on family property and we live out of that, but we don't really travel in that RV much lately because over the past several years, we like to travel even smaller, and we've been traveling and living out of our Jeep with a rooftop tent. Or now our most current vehicle is our Suburban, older model Suburban, and we even tent camp it. And we still have quite a bit of experience when it comes to juggling that work and travel and internet coverage. The main thing that we've learned over the years is that you cannot expect your work schedule and workflow to be exactly the same as it would be as if you were at home. You must learn to be flexible. And if you absolutely must have internet at a certain time on a certain day, you need to do some planning ahead. You can't just expect that, I'm going to have great internet coverage at whatever RV park that you might be. Now, when you're in an RV, not always, but most times, you'll most likely try to find accommodations at an RV park. That's usually what folks do. And RV parks or campgrounds have amenities like water, sewer, electricity. And when you do your research on a park, most privately owned parks will offer Wi-Fi, which is cool. Some state and national parks also have Wi-Fi availability, and sometimes you'll need to have a passcode to gain access to their router, and they'll give you that upon check-in. And sometimes it's a totally open network. But what Robert and I have found out over the years, a lot of RV park Wi-Fi really is mediocre at best. I'm hoping since 2011 it has gotten better, but in some parks it really hasn't. They boast having Wi-Fi, and then when you get in there, you check in, you get settled into your campsite that they put you in, the signal is so weak, it's hardly usable. Now, some parks have Wi-Fi boosters, which is good, to boost the signal from their main router to the outer parts of the park, which is good, but that doesn't help sometimes. Then you must be aware the fuller the park is, the more people that are using the Wi-Fi, the slower the internet becomes. And that can be stressful sometimes. Everyone is wanting to suck down the internet. And you need to be aware that some parks will throttle your usage down so that the only thing that you can do are small things like check email or do a little bit of social, maybe a bit of web surfing. But streaming and excessive uploads just won't happen. It just depends on what kind of internet that they have. And sometimes the more remote the campground is, sometimes it's not the best and the strongest signal. Now, just because a park may advertise that they have Wi-Fi, I must reiterate, you can't expect it to behave or be as strong of service as it would be at home. It's going to be different. If you aren't flexible, the stress of being connected constantly will just eat you up. So you must learn to be flexible. Even perhaps lowering your expectations and be pleasantly surprised when it's better than expected. When Robert and I were traveling quite a bit in the RV, we invested in a Wi-Fi booster. The brand we chose was Wi-Fi Ranger. What that did was take the Wi-Fi signal from the park's router and boost it so that we could have a bit stronger signal. Now, this wasn't always foolproof, and don't get me wrong, it did help. It really did. But if the signal was so poor to begin with, sometimes it couldn't be boosted enough to work, efficiently. And technology has changed so much. It advances so much each and every year. And we had gotten that Wi-Fi Ranger quite a few years ago. We haven't used it in the last few years, but I still recommend some sort of Wi-Fi booster if you're going to be frequently using RV parks. They'll be slightly different than the boosters that you have at home. My suggestion is to do your research for boosters for RV use because the antenna can be mounted outside on the RV. And, they're just made for being knocked around a little bit more than maybe something that you would install at home. Now, even though Robert and I haven't traveled in our big honkin' RV in the past several years, we have been known to book a site at an RV park for the purpose of using, their laundry, their shower, and yes, internet amenities. We've stayed at many a KOA for such purposes. And we may not have our Wi-Fi Ranger with us, if we're in our rooftop tent in the Jeep a few years ago, or even now in our Suburban. We may not have that Wi-Fi Ranger to boost the signal. So we sometimes just have to be creative. Sometimes that signal is stronger in the laundry room. So I walk over and my office is in the laundry room. Now, a few years back, we needed to stay put for a few days to get some work projects done. It's hard. You can do some work while you're traveling around, but when you need some focused time to work, you need to stay put. So we ended up stopping at Mesa Verde National Park in Colorado. As we were talking to the park ranger and trying to decide if there were camping sites available, because I think it was a holiday weekend, can't remember. We were talking with the ranger to see what was available and if we wanted to stay. And she mentioned that they do offer internet, which was cool because we weren't exactly sure, but we knew we needed to stay put for a few days. She had mentioned that it was satellite internet, and during storms, it wasn't very reliable. And she mentioned that some campers thought it was spotty coverage at best. She did let us know that the routers were located at the corner of each of the bathhouses. So we thought we'd take a chance. We took the chance and booked a night's stay just to see how it was. And because of her clue of where the routers were located, we picked our campsite as close as we could to the bathhouse. I like that plan anyway because, less of a walk when you have to go. But anyway, what we first thought would be spotty internet, we had low expectations, turned out to be great. Fantastic, in fact. We booked more nights camping so that we could get a lot of work done in a short amount of time. We managed to work for several days in the morning. Then we explored in the afternoon. The thing was, we had terrible cell coverage. Great internet, but terrible cell phone coverage. Now, I remember I had to have a client call during our stay there, and the only way it would work, was if I sat the phone in a certain place on the bed of our rooftop tent. I couldn't even move that phone anywhere, and I had to use the phone on speaker. So I was standing on the ladder of the rooftop tent, bent over the phone to talk to the client. And they were on speakerphone because I couldn't move that phone anywhere because any slight move, I'd lose signal. Now I was standing on that ladder of the rooftop tent and bent over the phone. It was such a sight. But it was what I had to do. It was a conversation that probably lasted 45 minutes or so. If we hadn't figured out the cell coverage and how that we could, we pre-planned a little bit for that phone call, we would have had to worked somewhere else. We couldn't work at that campsite. We would have traveled somewhere else where we had better cell coverage to take on that call, or I would have had to reschedule. That's just kind of what you do when you're camping out. So that's an example of like passing through and traveling. And we weren't necessarily in an RV at the time, but definitely in a campsite where RVs could camp. We had stayed in our RV for a long time in particular parts of the country and worked out of the RV just fine. Back several years ago, we were in Alabama, and I think we stayed 2 or 3 months, and I know that we were on a monthly type plan at this particular RV park, and we just parked it there, and it had the internet that we needed. We kind of tested it out before we committed for the 2 or 3 months, and the office had good internet and cell service. It was no problem. It was almost like being at home. And the same thing happened. We were staying about 2 or 3 months in Golden, Colorado, and were parked at an RV park, and it was just fine. When you're meandering around the country and not sure of the amenities and the surroundings, it gets a little hairy. And just read the reviews of the RV parks to see if people mention anything about internet coverage and things like that. Now, we like to use Wi-Fi that's available at the parks and that we are staying at as much as possible. Otherwise, We use our data coverage through our cell plan. The plans are much, much better than they used to be when we first started out, especially when it comes to how much data you can use. Now, there are still limits. Even though the plan may say you're unlimited, after so much data usage, they seem to throttle you down. So just kind of be aware of that. And for the most part, if you use a major carrier, cross-country coverage is pretty darn good. The two major ones that most of our fellow travelers use and what we use is Verizon or AT&T. Actually, if you were to travel for months at a time, it would not be a bad idea to have a phone or a hotspot with both Verizon and AT&T. Where one is not good, the other one might be better. Now, sometimes when you're in the middle of the desert or up in the mountain, there's just no coverage, period. But right now, Robert and I, we use Verizon. Now, we used to be on Sprint when we first started out, just on our phones, and then we had a Verizon hotspot device. And a lot of times, Sprint was inadequate. Back at that Mesa Verde example, the cell coverage was through Sprint. And I don't think we used our Verizon hotspot because we had park internet available. But right now, like I said, we have a Verizon on our phones. We use our phones for our hotspot device now. Now, Sprint coverage in some smaller towns was just lackluster. So I'm glad that we switched to Verizon and changed our plan so that we don't have to have that extra hotspot device. And each of our phones, sometimes if I've used so much on my phone, I'll switch over and suck down Robert's hotspot gigabytes. Now, our phones do have unlimited data, but apparently when we use our phones as a hotspot, the data has some limitations. For this reason, we are strategic when it comes to internet use on our hotspots. So, for example, I turn off all auto syncs, especially to Dropbox. Dropbox we use for the company quite extensively. And I don't sync Dropbox when we're on the move. I wait to sync those files when I'm using Wi-Fi from either a park or a library. Now, if we have large files to upload, like a video to YouTube, we won't do that on our hotspot either. Again, we wait to use public Wi-Fi connection. Now, right now, we only have Verizon service. But when we are set to have our 6 to 12 month nomadic trip, we're planning on adding an AT&T line. I may not get a full-fledged plan like we would with Verizon because, I don't want to necessarily pay monthly forever. But I plan on getting a prepaid plan to pay month to month. I think it would be a good idea to have that backup if we were gone for such a long time. It's just a good idea to be prepared in that way and making life a little bit less stressful. Now, we've been having really good luck with our Verizon service so far, but it could be better. We haven't yet, but we are going to purchase a cell booster. WeBooster is the brand that many of our Overlander friends use, and they have been pleased with the results. This is different than the Wi-Fi booster that's amplifying the RV park Wi-Fi signal. This is for the cell signal. So if this will take a weak cell signal and boost it to where hopefully you can work more efficiently. Here's one caveat. If there is absolutely no signal to boost, of course it's not going to work. If you had maybe 1 or 2 bars and it could boost you up to maybe 3 or 4, that would be a benefit. I believe those WeBoosters run about $400, and we'll be investing in one next year as our travel will be much more extensive and it will come in handy. Right now we don't have one and we're out and about and it's like, man, it would be nice, but this is a short trip, so we can suck it up and make do. But next year with larger travel plans, we are definitely investing in that. I hated to purchase one too soon when we weren't traveling as much because technology changes so rapidly, and I wanted to have one that worked well instead of a unit that was maybe on older technology and was inadequate. Regardless of whether you're at a park and need to boost Wi-Fi or using your cell data to work, you must be flexible with your schedule and plan ahead if you must have internet at a specific time. Robert and I were in the woods out east near Hot Springs, Tennessee. Now, we loved our camp spot that we picked out. It was free, it was remote, it was simply beautiful. The problem, absolutely zero cell coverage and internet coverage. We wanted to have this camp as our home for about a week. We just wanted to slow down and relax, but we had work to do. We just needed to work. So, to our delight, the little town of Hot Springs had a library. We checked out the library facilities, and they had a nice little workstation area, and we could use their Wi-Fi. And they didn't limit our time there, which was pretty cool. And what we did was planted our home at camp and drove into town each day to have our library office time. Let me tell you, we would have loved to have worked at camp and stayed there, but we needed to make things happen. We needed to make it possible to work, and we needed the internet. So that's what we did. We drove into quote unquote work every day. If the little town didn't have a library or any other facilities to have internet, maybe we would have stayed just one night and moved on. But instead, because we were flexible, we made the situation work, and we have wonderful memories of that place. And it turns out that it is one of our favorite work from anywhere experiences. Now, my friend that I mentioned at the beginning of the show is a life coach, and she right now has a rigid schedule of Zoom calls with clients. She and her husband have been on mini weekend trips in their RV, and they'd like to plan longer stays. And I think that's fantastic. As I said before, and what I told her, you cannot expect the exact same results in internet coverage as you would at home. You may need to restructure your work schedule or call schedule to accommodate. It depends on how you're going to be traveling or where you're going to stay. Now, I have reoccurring calls with clients. Some are Zoom and some are just plain phone calls. For the most part, I try to keep my call appointments. It depends on the nature of travel, though. Sometimes we call our travel workcations, and we are simply working and traveling at the same time. But sometimes I'm actually on vacation. So, of course, I want to take some time away from the computer, and you've got to have that. You've got to have some of that time off. But when we're in workcation mode, and I'm keeping my regular appointments, I must plan ahead to make sure I have the right Wi-Fi or cell coverage I need to make the calls happen. If I have to sit in the vehicle in town when my camp is 10 miles away, then that's what I do. Actually, just this week, we were camped in Ashley National Forest in Utah, and I had things scheduled that I could not miss. The coverage at our campsite wasn't good at all. We drove 45 minutes to the town of Vernal, Utah, to make our office in one of their community parks under a pavilion. We had electricity where I could keep things charged, and my hotspot was strong enough to do the Zoom calls that I needed. Now, there are possibilities of renting an office space for a few hours, those co-working stations. And there are sites out there that list these co-working spaces around the country to help you find office space if you need it to have, focused work time. Now, I have found that most of those co-working spaces are in bigger towns, but I want to say, as we were driving through, I think I was pleasantly surprised in one of the mountain towns in Colorado that we were driving through that I could have swore I saw a co-working space. And I want to say that it was in Idaho Springs, but don't quote me on that. I could be wrong. I know I was pleasantly surprised because I pointed it out to Robert, but I did not make a note in my journal, so I can't remember the exact mountain town. But in our travels, we tend to stay away from really big cities, so I haven't really used co-working spaces, but it is a good, viable option to keep in mind. And I always have this option in the back of my mind when we're planning work weeks. Have you ever watched that older movie with Robin Williams, RV? And you see him stressed out to the max trying to get enough signal to send his report via email to his boss? Well, that scenario is sometimes a reality. We will drive around campsites with our phone in hand or a computer on with Wi-Fi to see which camp spot has the best signal. And that will help us decide what, campsite we will go ahead and stay on. Sometimes, we decide on a campsite because of internet over beauty or scenery. So that's just how that happens. But it is kind of a funny sight for us just to have the phone in hand and it's like, oh, we've got 1 bar. Nope, back up. We've got 3 bars. Those are the conversations that Robert and I have. Remember, when you're trying to work from anywhere and need internet connection, the key is flexibility. Now, having tools like a Wi-Fi or cell booster will help. Those tools may not be foolproof. Think ahead a bit and either rearrange your schedule to accommodate where you're going to be or change where you're going to be able to get the work done that you need to do. It's a combination of both, really. I'm going to wrap things up for this episode. I do hope that this has been a helpful episode for you, whether you're thinking about starting RV travel or camping more or whatever, or whether you're already doing it. Maybe I've given you a few helpful pointers, or at least maybe you're amused at some of my stories because that's the reality. I was talking to my team member, Brandy, because I was working at a picnic table and I was taking some pictures, and one picture that I sent her, it was like, hey, it's kind of the Instagram perfect picture that, hey, it's beautiful scenery, you've got the computer, everything is, wonderful. The very next picture was the reality. I was under my coat with the screen, I was close to my screen, my coat covering my head and the screen so that I had no reflection on the screen so that I could actually work. Working out in the sun on any type of regular computer is just painful. Not all the screens are conducive for outside work. It's just too many reflections. I don't like to look at myself. I need to look at the document in front of me or the design work instead of, my face. Most computer screens become a mirror when you're outdoors. But oh well, I'm wrapping up. I do want to remind you, if you're a branding consultant or if you know one and they don't want to manage a whole bunch of employees or independent contractors, yet you want to have recurring income from your clients, let's talk. Really, I'd love to talk with you. Maybe you're like me. You keep a small office and like to work from anywhere, right? Scrivener Solutions offers white label content marketing services. Yeah. You concentrate on creating the branding strategy and the marketing plan for your clients and let the Scrivener Solutions team help you implement your plan. Let's face it, your clients don't have the bandwidth to actually implement the plan that you work so hard to develop. And a plan's not going to work unless you implement it. So go over to scrivenersolutions.com /white label to find out more details about how you can tap into our experience and our systems to create recurring income for your branding consultancy. Again, go to scrivenersolutions.com /white label. Let's talk. Schedule a call. Well, until next time, have a fantastic week.